Hello, folks. Welcome to Hope Rescue Podcast. I'm Tim, and this is Kimberly. We are Tim and Kimberly Scott at Hope Rescue Podcast, and we're glad that you're with us. You know, before we get into the 5 things I would never do as a spouse, because we've talked about a few different things that we would never do, and that comes from social media, by the way.
Yeah.
5 things I would never do as a doctor or whatever.
Yeah.
If you Google that or Bing it,
Hashtag it if you're on Instagram, 5 things I would never do, or
TikTok.
Look up 5 things I'd never do on TikTok.
You'll see it. And so that's what we're doing. That's what these podcasts have been. And we're going to talk, Kimberly's going to share 5 things I would never do as a spouse, right? Mm-hmm. And something I would never do as a spouse. Have you ever done this? Like you have an email that you're sending, but especially a text. You type on the little keyboard, your text that you want to send, and you're all done, and you look at it, you read over it, and then you send it. You're checking it for problems.
Right.
You send it. Right after you send it, you go, oh, I misspelled that word, or that's
annoying.
Not what I wanted to say. You even proofread it, and it still comes out wrong.
Yeah.
Anyway, that happens. Well, last week after we recorded, I noticed the recording had me on the phone, on the video with no wedding ring. Something I would never do as a pastor is preach without a wedding ring.
For good reason.
We were at a pastor's conference one time, and this world-famous pastor, world renowned, we won't say who he was, he was up there, and he's preaching without a wedding ring.
I kept thinking, why does he not have a ring on? Because let me tell you, women notice that stuff. We notice that stuff.
Well,
not
you
a good
pointed
plan.
it out. I didn't even notice.
If you forget to put it on, then get it tattooed. That's my thought. And then if you don't like wearing the weight of gold or whatever when you go to the gym, wear one of those little plastic ones.
You know the thing about it, if I remember it right, I was listening to the spiritual content, and you were worried about the ring.
Well, I'm just telling you, women notice. And I don't know if men do or not, but we notice those things. Like when someone's a spouse, a husband, why aren't you repping that on your hand, bro?
Yeah, be married if you're married, and he is married.
Right.
Anyway, this is Kimberly's turn to say the 5 things she wouldn't
never do as a spouse. And I say as a spouse because I feel like these are principles that are for male or female. Doesn't matter. And as always, I like to put in a disclaimer that it's not that we haven't done these things, but I can tell you that we have been on the receiving end. Both Tim and I, our story is that we are in our second marriage, married 17 years of glorious perfection.
Yes, glorious.
Not so much, but we have learned a lot in the things to do and not to do based on some of our own failures. So I'm going to launch into this list of the things that we would love to give away to you to help make your marriage better. And the first thing to not do as a spouse would be to avoid healthy conflict. So when you hear the word conflict, we are all, I know for me, for sure, I'm very conflict averse because we live in a world that is so conflict ridden right now. In fact, I can barely watch TV or news or even social media. Everybody's fighting about something. So it's natural to want to sort of duck your head for cover and not engage. But actually in a relationship, whether friendship, but mostly marriage, if you're avoiding healthy conflict, then you're going to be in trouble. Just wait for the big bang to happen because it's coming.
Yeah.
It's
conflict
important.
Is part of relationship.
It is. And so I would say to qualify that, it's not that you're wanting to fight with your spouse, but what you're wanting to do is fight for each other and push through.
That's good. Well said.
Push through uncomfortable conflict. And I think, I'd like to encourage you, of course, to use wise tools when you're doing that in communication. There's a lot of different things that you can think about. I think the tone of your voice is a really good place to start.
Even the tone of your text.
Yeah.
Do you remember the other day? I think it was yesterday.
Yes.
I sent you a text and I go, the tone wasn't right.
That sounded too direct.
Yeah,
because you think through directive. That's your temperament.
I'm kind of abrupt person,
Yeah, well, it's just funny because you're such a love in real life and you're a total encourager, but you communicate through text and through emails very direct, like a leader, like you are. So, and you're not the first one I've met that does that, but it is cute that you qualified it because I thought, well, see, that's growth right there.
Yeah. Well, there you you go.
But yeah, so I think, and that's a real important thing is the temper of your voice, your passion, dial it down, any anger, communicate through conversation. And if you're the one that is approaching this potential conflict, I would say to lead with carrying the responsibility of how this particular action or whatever is impacting you. In other words, the way this happened, it made me feel like. So you're not like pointing fingers or attacking, but you're bringing to the table in a careful way, ways to be able to process through what could potentially end up being an issue. And not addressing it just means that you will at some point, and you don't want to not address it. That's going to end up being a problem over time. So that would be my number one. Number two would be, of 5 things I'd never do as a spouse, is to withhold love or affection. And I'm going to include sex in that because that's a big deal in marriage.
Let's do.
Yes.
Mention that one more time.
Those are not tools for manipulation. Those are not prizes for good behavior. And they're not punishment for bad behavior. So I think, love and affection needs to be natural and should flow freely. But I'll just tell, in our stories, in our first marriages, there was cheating involved. And so it's really important that you go into marriage knowing that you pursue love and affection. And if there's a problem, you process through it, and you don't withhold love and affection if you're upset with someone or...
Yeah, we had, I'll just tell a quick story. Several years ago, I'm guessing 10 years ago or something. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 10 years ago. We were arguing about something. We don't argue a lot, but we definitely...
I think we bicker.
Clash,
we bicker.
Well, we clash over ideas. We're both opinionated.
Yes, for sure.
I was in this kind of a conflict with you, and anyway, as we were in this conflict, it escalated.
It was getting lit.
We got lit, and it just was a moment of kind of carelessness on both of our part. Anyway, I wasn't relenting. Kimberly wasn't relenting. It resulted in Kimberly driving away. Got in the car, driving away. It was nighttime. Drove away. A few minutes later, she came back and she's standing there. I'm kind of sitting in the same spot, kind of stunned.
Wait, I have to qualify this a little bit.
Let's not get into too many details.
No, all I'm going to say is I came back for many reasons. One of them being I still had wet hair and I was in my bathrobe.
Yeah, well.
It was nighttime,
I wasn't
going to
go there, yeah. But anyway, okay. So she comes back and she stands in front of me, and I stood up and we hugged, and within just less than a minute, we were both laughing and hugging and reconnecting. And it was a great lesson to both of us that we love each other even when we disagree. And you don't have to reconnect by agreeing. You can still disagree and reconnect. And the resolution of that was not agreement, but the resolution of that was, we don't agree, but we love each other. We jokingly say, agree to disagree.
Right. Agree to disagree.
Yeah. But, if it wasn't for that, we'd be at conflict all the time.
Right.
It's okay to disagree. It's not okay to attack.
Right. And
So
I
that's
think
good.
the
a
love
really
and
good point.
affection thing is more about, when someone gets upset and they withdraw.
Right.
For days at a
terrible.
time. And the psychological and emotional impact that can have on their significant other is deadly. And not just the other, but the kids too. I mean, it creates just a really bad example for children in coping with conflict, to walk away and never come back, or whenever it's on your terms. And in the meantime, you get the silent treatment is deadly. And it's really a terrible example.
If you're the recipient of the cold shoulder, the best thing you can do is lovingly approach that issue and say, this is a problem, and I think we need to work at reconnecting and find a loving way to approach that topic, because you can't just let it go on.
Right.
Letting it go on for a few minutes is fine. Letting it go on for an hour or two, not a big deal. Letting it go on for days or weeks, you're probably going to need to get some counseling.
Yeah, you become islands.
Yeah, and you probably need someone to help you reconnect.
Right.
There's no shame about that. Don't feel badly about that.
Right.
But if you can't talk through it and reconnect, then that's a problem. That's when you need somebody else outside to
and
help.
it's worth the hard work of rolling up your sleeves and having the uncomfortable conversations to reconnect. And obviously affection and love doesn't come like a flood right after you've been through that. It's more about the intention of loving well and pursuing that other person to breach the gap.
Right.
Even sex, obviously, when you're after a heated argument, some people maybe just jump in bed, good for you. But sometimes, more often, it takes time to come walk away from the passion of the conflict. But you don't do that without pursuing that person and say, I love you, I'm sorry, and the other stuff follows. But
Yeah. I just want to, as you're speaking, I'm thinking, it's important not to use sex as the point of reconnection.
Right.
Sex is an outflow of reconnection. Making sex an event, now we're okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe you're not okay. Maybe that was a sexual experience that was not a heart of connection and intimacy. It was begrudging or whatever. I think it's really important not to use affection or sex. That should be an outflow of reconnection. And that's not what we're saying. Because then it just becomes another way to use sex in a negative way.
Right. Good point. Very
okay.
good point. Number 3 is I would never, as a spouse, tear down my husband or spouse in public or even in private. So we've done it, but we've seen it, and we've counseled a lot of couples that will publicly go after their spouse. And that's a no-win situation on every level. If you're in public and you tear down your spouse in front of coworkers, friends, your children, you're losing respect on all sides if you're the offender, number one. We both came from a generation. I don't know. I'll just tell my story. My dad was such a loving man and had a great sense of humor and made a lot of his jokes at his family's expense, and changed that over time and through years, through our teenage years, because at some point we felt brave enough to talk about it. Frankly, my mom confronted him and said, that's not funny anymore. And his heart was in the right place, I think.
But it's the humor he
but
knew.
There was a price to pay, for that. And so again, you want to use your words to build up and not tear down. And even as a joke or sarcasm, our culture of our house is very like dry humor or
even
slam
humor, but it's not about sensitive issues.
Right. And I would just say that we don't do that. We don't pull that trigger unless there's money in the bank to write that check on, because if there's not in that relationship, the equity in the relationship, then it's going to fall flat, and that's not cool.
I like the way you say it. Sometimes you can write that check, but it's going to bounce.
It's going to bounce. Yeah, it's going to bounce.
It's a good way. Keep that in mind.
Yeah. So you make sure, even if that's the culture of your home and in your humor, that that you're not doing it at somebody else's expense, for sure. So use your words to build up and encourage instead. And number 4 is one of the things that I would never do as a spouse is to use unqualified friends or family to counsel my marriage issues. In other words, a lot of times we will process, quote unquote, challenges in the marriage or issues you have with your spouse with sometimes whoever's in hearing shot, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's
and but most often it's with friends and sometimes family members. And what happens is you may feel better when you walk away, but you've just created in that person that you've downloaded to an issue with your spouse, or maybe you've lost credibility with them and they disrespect you for telling them that. But if your goal is to pursue healing in your marriage or in your area, find a qualified friend, someone who's been tested and true, that loves you and your spouse equally. So it's not like they're going to lean in one favor or the other. That can bring balance to your opinions and your feelings. They're not afraid to speak their mind, but choose them wisely. Not everybody can afford a counselor. That would be ideal if everybody could. But sometimes you'll have to find a trusted friend, and that's the key, is that they would be trusted. I would encourage you as a partner in your marriage to not process your marriage issues with your children.
Oh, that's good. That's
because
really important.
that often becomes the case when there's dysfunction in a marriage, and you're not calling a friend or a counselor, and you just spill over to your kid who's sitting, at the dinner table, or whoever is available, and that is unhealthy.
Think about what that does to that child. You're talking about the most important man or woman, depending on your spouse, a man or a woman.
Right.
And you're talking about their parent.
Right.
And they're caught in the middle, and they may agree with you because maybe that other person is harsher, or they see the same kind of struggle. All you've done is you've created division in your home. It's a huge mistake.
Right. Yeah. And then most importantly, for number 4, is to avoid inappropriate friendships in the workplace. Now, this is a big deal, and this is a breeding ground for affairs.
Straight up.
And we've seen it over and over again in our years of counseling. You may be just processing challenges at home. Maybe you're a new dad or a new mom. You go to work and you've got babies at home, or new babies, and you're just kind of going through some of the issues. I'm not sleeping enough at night, and my wife, she sleeps a lot during the day, and we're not getting laundry done. Simple things like that. But you start to create a story, and someone's a good listener, and then you're sharing some of the intimate issues of your challenges in your life. Well, then that's creating intimate conversation with someone who should just be a coworker. So we would just really encourage you to keep a boundary on that. That's not your safe place. There's a reason why they call it a work wife, and that's because they kind of are your person that you go to. Don't.
Yeah, that's changed to a work spouse.
Yeah.
That's good advice. Don't. But remember this, that when you do that, you're being disloyal to your spouse.
And to yourself.
And yes, and to you, because you are one in Christ.
Right.
But also you are creating the possibility that that person that's listening, that he or she may think, well, let me take care of your needs.
Exactly.
And that's where the affair starts.
Right.
So they hear negative about the person you're supposed to be so loyal to. If you're listening to someone at work and they're talking about their spouse negative like that,
You're complicit.
and your relationship is started that way, and it goes on, and you think that's not going to happen
Right.
after you get married, if you marry that person, that's a problem.
Yeah.
That it just is going to be a problem.
Yeah. And we know that in those scenarios, people can present the best. Well, this is what you should do. And if I was that person, if I was your spouse, no, that's bull crap. You need to know that they're probably not that person behind the scenes with their spouse. So just avoid the temptation of that. I know
that's good.
It's easy to want to have those conversations, but just don't. Number 5 is
The 5 and final.
5 and final. Don't expect your spouse to take responsibility for your spiritual walk, personal growth, or personal development. I learned this the hard way in round 1 for me in my first marriage. I had a very strong spouse, very dominant and controlling. And over time, I stopped listening to my own spiritual voice, leaning into the Lord on my own, and allowed him to be that voice. And it was toxic. And I lost myself in that process. And I learned as I became a single mom, I had to take full responsibility for my own spiritual walk, for my own guidance from the Lord, to pursue him and his word as a foundation for my life. I needed to take responsibility for my own personal development and not be given orders by someone, but to pursue that for myself, to better myself. That can look like anything, like personal goals, like, reading certain materials, whatever. You can define what that looks like. But the mistake we make is that we go into a marriage looking for a spouse, potentially, that will complete us, quote unquote. And that is a mistake, because God designed each of us to stand on our own. We were designed complete by him, and he's the one to complete our level of wisdom, our spiritual walk, our development. All of those things are in his plans, and we get to discover what they are. But we don't pursue a relationship with someone hoping they'll be the ones to define all of that, because they will. That happens all the time, and that's a mistake. So if you can see it more like two individuals, complete and whole, coming together to bring their best of themselves. And yes, you do. There's a beautiful completion about that, but you don't come in as a half. You come in as a whole.
Yeah. One caveat I would put to that, and I think you probably know this, but Kimberly and I are committed to the roles. We see biblical roles where a man does take responsibility to meet the needs of his wife. Mm-hmm. The wife does take responsibility to meet the needs of her husband. Mm-hmm. So in counseling, oftentimes we'll talk to, say, a wife, and as we talk to the wife, we say, we understand that your husband is not meeting your spiritual, emotional, or physical needs or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But we're not talking to him right now. We're talking to you. So what we want to encourage you is to go to the Lord, find your fulfillment there, so that when you come in relationship to him, you're a whole, as Kimberly, you were just saying. Mm-hmm. But also then if I'm talking to the husband, I say, you need to meet the needs of your wife, and vice versa, whoever's not meeting the needs. So when you're confronting someone about their failure, that's fine. But when you are talking to someone who has been failed, don't be complicit in saying, hey, you're right, he is not meeting your needs. You have every right to have your needs met there. No, point them to Christ, point them to the Lord, so that they can come in relationship. Now, that is a balanced way to approach marriage. I know that not all the time do I meet my wife's needs. All the time my wife doesn't meet my needs. Right. But we are striving to find our needs met from the Lord so that we can meet each other's needs more effectively. So, well, those are your 5 things. Those are great. 5 things, and we're grateful that you listen to these. We are Hope Rescue Podcast. You can find us at hoperescue.org. Go there and see what God has provided through our ministry. We have Bible studies you can listen to, in-depth expository approach to Scripture. Eventually, we'll have the whole New Testament there.
Can I throw something in?
All these archived podcasts as well.
I just want to say a special thank you. You know who you are, for those of you who are contributing for us to be able to do this for you every week. And for us, we've had so much encouragement. It's crazy how far podcasts can go and how many times we've been stopped.
Tens of thousands of people.
It's a gift, and we are able to give that gift because you've been giving gifts.
Yes, thank you.
And so thank you for allowing us, and times are tough and the inflation is up, and we've done our job to be able to kind of, tighten the screws here financially, and we've had to let some people go, and volunteers have stepped up. Thank God.
Our funding dropped, so we're doing a lot of our own.
We're trying to be very responsible with that. So, but we just want to say from our heart, thank you so much for allowing us to continue to do this, and we sure look forward to and are welcome to take any requests that you may have of topics that are relevant to you. We'd love to do that.
Okay. We'll see you next week. God bless.
Bye, guys.